Hiya teacher friends! Welcome to my video on conjunctions as part of my grammar series where I teach iTalki teachers how to teach grammar on iTalki. So as I mentioned, we're talking about conjunctions today. So what are conjunctions? Conjunctions are ways to elegantly structure sentences. They could also combine different phrases, clauses, or just different words in general. So let's get started. Let's start with coordinating conjunctions. This is probably the simplest form of conjunctions because we're able to put it in an acronym. The acronym is called Fanboys, and that stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So, Fanboys, these coordinating conjunctions, they combine different words and phrases which are equal grammatical rank. We're going to talk about that in a moment, what that actually means, and how this relates to different kinds of clauses. The second kind of conjunctions, which will probably be quite useful to your students, especially with academic English, are correlative conjunctions. And these are two-part conjunctions that actually combine different parts of sentences. So for example, we have either or, neither nor, or probably the most common one, not only but also, right? This has been very useful with my students, especially my IELTS students, when structuring part 1 answers of the speaking test. It's a great way to add more information. So not only but also. For example, not only am I an English teacher, but I am also a student. You could give your students just a simple list of description words, just adjectives, for example, and they could say, not only am I happy, but I am also excited. You probably noticed that I said not only am I, instead of not only I am. So we actually used the verb and then the noun in not only. This is probably the first piece of exposure your students will have to negative adverbials and what we call inversion, when we invert the noun and the verb. If this doesn't make sense, that's totally okay. I'll be making a separate video on inversion and how this could be useful not only to advanced level students, but how it also tends to occur even in beginner and intermediate level exercises. Okay, and when we talk about conjunctions, this is probably the most important piece right here. These are subordinating conjunctions. I don't know about you, but in grammar class, when I heard the word clause and conjunctions and subordinating, that's when I just turned off. I was like, okay, I throw in the towel. That is it. There's just some sort of trigger in those words that made me kind of call it quits, right? But I have to tell you, it's more straightforward than you would think. And a lot of your students, this is very important in their learning process. So for you to be aware of this terminology could really come in handy. So let's walk through it together. Now, a clause is a part of a sentence, yeah? A subordinating conjunction, those are words like since, as, although, even though, while, whereas. They combine an independent clause and a dependent clause. So now, what is an independent clause and a dependent clause? Well, basically, an independent clause is a part of a sentence, yeah, which could survive on its own, yeah. Ryan went to the market, yeah. That is grammatically correct. It could survive on its own. On the other hand, a dependent clause cannot survive on its own. That's why it's dependent. Most of the time this clause will involve, usually it will be preceded by one of these subordinating conjunctions. And that's why we call it subordinating, because it actually makes this piece of information dependent so that it can't survive on its own. So for example, even though I am happy. Even though I am happy. That cannot survive on its own. We need more information. So that is a dependent clause right there. All right, let me give you 3 examples. The first one, we'll use whereas. This is one common way to use conjunctions. It's very useful with academic English if you're teaching your students essay writing. Whereas. So, clause number 1. I am happy. Clause number 2. Whereas Mark is sad. Yeah. So which one is the dependent and which one is the independent clause? Well, I am happy. That could survive on its own. That makes perfect sense. But if you say whereas Mark is sad, that does not survive on its own. We need another piece to go with whereas. So whereas is a subordinating conjunction. It makes Mark is sad dependent. But the first part, Ryan is happy, is independent. It could survive on its own. All right, so that's one example. Here's another example with even though. This is another common expression right here. So, even though I am a teacher, I make mistakes. I make mistakes even though I am a teacher. Notice that you could actually flip these around, and this will become a very useful strategy for your students to be able to do this as well, to avoid repetition. So let's look at the reverse this time. Even though I am a teacher, that cannot survive on its own because since we have even though, we need another piece of information. We need something to contrast it with, right? And that's why we have I make mistakes. I make mistakes is an independent clause. It's an independent piece of the sentence. It could exist on its own. But even though I'm a teacher, that cannot exist on its own. So that is the dependent clause. Let's look at one more common example, the word because, right? So, for example, I am cooking because I am hungry, right? So, because could be used to show reasons for something. We all know that. So because I am hungry, that is the dependent clause right there. I am cooking, that is independent. Because we could just say I am cooking, okay, I understand you. But if you just say because I am hungry, we're waiting for more information. Great, so how could you bring this to your iTalki class? Well, maybe you could make some sort of jigsaw puzzle with different clauses and they could bring them together. Like they could look at different reasons if you want to use because as an example. They could look at some different reasons and they could look at some different results and they could kind of pair them, mix and match them together. And when your students reach a high enough level, it's good to go online and look at different transition phrases. These are different phrases that you could use in an essay, for example, which kind of connect different thoughts together and different sentences together. And this could really help their fluency with writing as well. All right, well, that's it for today. I hope that you found that helpful. If you have any questions, throw them in the box below. Please like and subscribe. And when you're feeling good with conjunctions, head on over to the 8th video on prepositions. And until we see each other again, keep smiling.